Hello and welcome back to Rocket Pod. On today's show, we're joined by James Potten. James, early on in his life, was a professional windsurfer, youngest of 7, and has got a very unique skill set, actually implementing processes and tools to scale businesses. He did this with eco-surety and environmental consultancy, scaling to 12 million turnover and 50 employees. He's chaired various charities and helped scale other businesses, and in the last couple of years has founded Amplified, where he works closely with entrepreneurs and business leaders to help them simplify their lives and implement these proven processes and tools to help them scale their businesses. And really, I love the way he frames purpose and objectives, and really helps free up these entrepreneurs and leaders to spend more time on the high value things. So yeah, really delighted to have him on the show today. James and I have known each other for a little over a year, and his thinking has actually really helped reframe how I run my business. Welcome, James.
Hey, James. Good to be here.
Nice to see you. So, as I just mentioned, James is the founder of Amplified, and Amplified works with busy entrepreneurs to reduce complexity in their lives and helps them put processes and tools, or provides the tools and process to effectively scale their businesses. I met James probably about a couple of years ago on LinkedIn, actually. It wasn't that sexy of a meeting, but there was something about James that kind of stood out to me. I loved his growth mindset, and I really like his different approach to life and to business. And we got talking, and we've since, kind of grown a relationship, and I've, he's really helped me with my entrepreneurial journey. So I'll tell you what, so James, he scaled an environmental consultancy company called eco-surety from, a couple of employees or no employees to 50 employees and a turnover of 12 million. And held both operational roles, and also was the managing director for a lot of that tenure. What I'd like to do before we kind of go into the business side, I'd like to go right back to perhaps your, where you grew up. What was your childhood like? When did you first get interested in business? Would you describe yourself as an entrepreneur? Maybe you had some entrepreneurial experiences early on. So can we just go back to your upbringing and kind of what drives you, because you're a very driven individual, but again, you like to simplify. So could you kind of take us on a bit of a journey there, James?
Of course. Great. We'll do, James. It's really interesting. Just to answer the first question regarding like being an entrepreneur, I didn't call myself an entrepreneur or think of myself as an entrepreneur until more recent years, probably the last sort of 5 years. Even in 2016, after like exiting a business, it hadn't been a name that I'd associated with myself. Almost thought of myself more as an entrepreneur. But so just interesting, as I've gone on my own sort of journey with growing businesses, I've realized the tools and the methodologies and the approach that I take, are entrepreneurial, but hadn't considered it. So yeah, look, going right back, I grew up in the West Country, little town in Somerset, next to a farm, had like, a chicken farm, and they had sheep next to us. And, I actually ended up, by the age of 8 got into showing chickens myself. So that was just like, wasn't the cool thing to do, but it was the thing I ended up doing. And I think probably my mum realized that, that wasn't going to sort of help me in social circles. So she actually ended up, she won something called the 1,000 Club, and you get 500 quid. And mum used that to actually buy a windsurfer. So we got into windsurfing. I couldn't do it until I was about 10. I tried it like 9, 10-ish, like maybe 11. I could actually lift the sail up and go along on it. And, my chicken days were behind me after that. I basically started to, I just loved it. I ended up doing a race and winning it, a local regional race. And then by the age of, this is about 13, and by the end of that year, I did a national event and won that. And next thing I know, I was in the British youth team. And that really was that now looking back was an incredible opportunity to like start working on mindset. So we had a coach, and unfortunately my coach from back then, who I got in touch with recently. He's just passed away, but we've been talking like back and forth the last sort of 3 or 4 months, and he was saying, look, you were getting the same coaching as Ben Ainsley. Like, we were all the RYA were coaching all of the coaches across all of the disciplines in the same way. So really interesting to hear that, because that was just, you were taught to think about what was happening on the board, what was happening on the course, who you were trying to beat, like on the course, what was happening in the weather systems. There was all this kind of like, where are you in your thoughts, like, and shifting like your shifting the position of your thinking. So that was the start of that. Ended up running the windsurf club at university, creating the Student Windsurf Association, and ran the biggest windsurfing event in the UK off the back of my credit card, with like
wow.
$3,000 like put onto it. 500 plus students turn up in autumn in Weymouth, and that was I still didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur. It's super weird. All I was doing was trying to get a group of people together to have the same fun that we had when we were at university. That was our sole kind of thing. And it was, all not for profit, creating the Student Kitesurf Association. And then, basically the journey, I was getting frustrated as an engineer, had some good opportunities with Honeywell, and had been out in Paris, LA, where else? I'd been in Munich, Melbourne, Australia. So they sent me around, but I felt like I wanted something more in my entrepreneurial journey. And a friend from uni had just sort of started the environmental consultancy, and he's said, look, I think this is going to work. When I joined, it was about 9 months after it started, and three of us basically in it. And we went on a journey with that to grow it to 50 people over 12 years. But the first 6 years, we struggled to retain and to get staff. It was just this really difficult. We were very kind of task orientated, and just came in, sat in our desks, got our head down, got our work done, went home. There wasn't this. We didn't really create like a real kind of bond between us as a team. And we ended up getting, finding a non-exec who came in and really helped us with our thinking about how to create almost like, a board that is something that tethers us to what we've said we were going to do. Also bringing in sort of a sales coach as well, and creating a commercial mindset. And also, to be honest, starting to work on the values of the business, why we existed, what we were trying to create in the world. What was our sort of promise to our clients, and the whole thing about sitting on the same side of the table as them and not on the other side, sort of auditing. All of this stuff came through, and it was all of that really kind of fired my thinking in later life. It's funny, everything you look back retrospectively and go, so that's what was happening. And you talked a bit about, well, what was it that sort of fired me or drove me? I'm from a family of 7, blended family, so there's a lot of roles already taken. I'm the youngest, so
youngest.
So I have, there's a sort of like there's a peacekeeper role a bit in that, but also it's I could also look to my siblings and see, what they'd done, what worked, what hadn't worked, and it took a lot from that.
That's really interesting. So I have to ask you this. So back to the chickens. Do you see any similarity between chickens and human beings? As far as, and
personal question.
So you can answer that in a minute. And then second observation, you mentioned that this coach of yours, what was your coach's name?
Chris Daisy.
Chris. Okay. So Chris, sounds like Chris really had a big impact in you early on. And actually, I didn't realize you were a windsurf champion. I knew you did kite surfing, and I want to talk about that a bit later. But I like the way that it was the board, the weather, who you competing with, what's the objective, and it's that mindset and that positioning. Because I think you asked me a question I don't mind sharing it, 8 months ago or so, and you said, it doesn't have to be a struggle, or it's almost like, it's like, what are you trying to achieve? So it sounds like that really impacted so the chickens, whether that's shaped your direction, your trajectory. But then having someone in your life, would you say that Chris was one of the most influential people, made one of the biggest impacts, or did it come from your family? I guess it's probably, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because, my dad, who's unfortunately no longer with us, was a real, he reached like the highest level in engineering that you could get without having a university degree. So he didn't ever get to director level, but was a sort of troubleshooter that was put into parts of the business that weren't performing, and he would turn them around. It wouldn't necessarily align to some of the modern day thinking in like leadership and management, but he was willing to go into a team, almost find the ringleader that was like bringing that team down, and challenge that person. And that, to some extent, everyone else kind of falls into line if you're willing to do that. He also, had a rule that he would observe before making his move. So he said, you need to, in this day and age, everybody wants everything like instantly, but he used to say, I would wait 3 months before I really started making big changes. I wanted to see what was happening in that team, and because what you first think is happening isn't always what's really happening. You've got to get beneath it. So so mum and dad, mum has given me that kind of she that thirst to travel, to explore the world. Was taught me to windsurf when she was 45 or nearing 50 or whatever.
Wow.
So there's definitely that. But look, the thing with being in the British youth team with Chris, I feel very grateful and just blessed to have been like in that situation where I had somebody who was getting me to think in a different way. And again, on reflection, it was about 28, finding it hard to really lead that the role that I had in the environmental consultancy. And I sort of thought back, I was like, 10 sort of 15 years ago, I had a coach. And so maybe I need a business, maybe I need one in business. So why is business any different to sport? You're ultimately trying to get and this is a philosophical point about like business as a leadership. I see a business as a team, not a family. Like a family is complex, and it's not always possible to make the decision that you want to make because of the complexity. Within a team, you want the best players on the pitch, and you want the people that are who have stepped up, who are willing to make it happen. And you do need the choice to substitute and so on. But you also need to, there's a lot of trust. Like when you look at great managers, they have great relationships generally with their team. So one thing that I did take from Chris is where you set your goal. And the biggest mistake I made was that my goal was to get in the British youth windsurfing team. And when I got into it, that goal was achieved. So I didn't perform as well as I think I could have at like Europeans, championships and so on, because I didn't set my goal in the right place, and and to be honest, did we really unpick that with him? I think we started to unpick it, but by that time, I decided my path was to go, to university. Whereas, others in the team, two others in the team, one has continued on and done very well. Another, has still ended up sort of in the industry. But when I work with like business leaders, where you set your goal is everything, because if you set your goal, and this is why I love OKRs, because OKRs, objectives and key results, is about setting a goal that's out, a North Star needs to be well out, triple horizon, well out of reach. And an objective needs to be, if you hit 70%, then you've done really well. You've achieved what you wanted to, because you've set it further than it's just out of reach. It's 70, so it's really key this. And that's, so that I would say that is something, the biggest thing I took from
okay, that's really interesting on the goal setting piece, because something that I've actually, I wouldn't say it's something that I'm trying to get my head around. So I'll make a promise to myself on a particular objective, and then find myself not quite reaching it. Maybe it's that 70% thing, and then feeling like I'm in this failure loop because I don't get everything done. I get close, but not. I mean, obviously, some things I smash, and that's fine. But some of the bigger goals, and it might just be. So I kind of started thinking about a desired outcome versus a goal. But I think having the mindset that 70% actually you're you've done well, so you can kind of give yourself a bit of credit. And I think it's that glass is half full mentality. But I think understanding that actually 70% is amazing. I mean, most politicians get elected on just 40% or so.
52%.
Oh, was it 52%? Okay, well, I knew it was okay.
No,
well, it depends how many people are running. But yeah, exactly. So that's kind of interesting. So your relationship with let's talk about that. Let's talk about you've already touched on it. Your relationship with goal setting, some of the pitfalls, which I think you just touched upon. And how do you develop a healthy mindset when it comes to goal setting, or do we call it something else?
Look, it's a brilliant question, because destination obsession is real. It's actually, it can be really problematic. And if I'm being frank, 25% of the conversations I have with founders is often where it starts with, we're going to be the next Google, and that's hard, right? Because there's this $7 trillion company. Like it's that not many companies make it to be the next Google. And I do believe in having like aspirational goals that get people out of bed in the morning. So that is really important. But we're starting to go into like team dynamics, high performing teams, that type of discussion. Then you sort of have to connect with, well, what actually motivates your team, and different people are motivated by different things. So there's EMI sort of schemes, share option schemes can be a motivator for someone to feel like they own something or part of it. But actually sometimes people's horizons are shorter than that, and it can be a kind of profit share, or even like flexibility in how they're working, or having a day off, or being able to do something that's with a charity that they care about, or there's loads of other things than necessarily just money. Amplified is, I started off with AMP, which is autonomy, mastery, purpose. I think it's Dan Pink. So that model is, if you take money off the table, then the thing that ultimately motivates particular roles. So it's not like factory production line as such, but like where there's cognitive kind of energy needed, then autonomy in the role, mastery of it, and a purpose that drives people is what matters. So going back to the 70% is a celebration. I think you should always have champagne moments, and the point that a team says, this is where we want to get to. I work in quarterly rhythms. Personally, I've done that because I think as human beings, we're sort of, not everyone has seasons on the planet, but like a lot of the planet has seasons, and we're sort of used to this kind of seasonality of every 3 months. We take stock, reflect, move forwards. The first thing I ask, like the leaders I work with, if you've set goals, and I try and help them sort of create these rhythms, how are you going to celebrate? So, you set these goals, but where's the fun? How are you going to celebrate at the end of this? And the way, do it with a bit of sort of tongue in cheek, but the way we wouldn't have done this on a quarterly basis necessarily, but we did have we were launching a new product, and it was a 6-month slog. And the way we like set out how we'd celebrate is, if we hit this level, we're going to go to the dry ski slope. If we hit this level, we're going to go to Milton Keynes indoor. And if we hit this, which is 100%, then we're going to Andorra as a team. So it's it's doing the same thing, but like at different levels.
And
look, there's also the reality that skiing isn't for everyone. So you end up with sort of like some compromises in there. But just that concept of trying to think where we would have set it, but maybe 70% was going to the dry ski slope, and it's difficult, isn't it? Like, should you reward not hitting a target? What I knew how hard the team were working, so probably 60% we would have gone to the dry ski slope. So yeah. So it's that kind of thing, that people worry about targets and running business by numbers, in that it becomes boring, and that it takes away sort of like the fun and creativity, and it's not like the good old days of when it was just a few of us. But if you want to be able to create repetition and high quality, things have to start to be documented, and you have to start to like understand what works and what doesn't work. And when you make a mistake, have a system. And I advocate checklists and creating sort of standard operating procedures in checklists and in video format. Having that. We're just going through B Corp at the moment, and there's loads of things that we don't meet, but we can very quickly tick that we do meet it, because we take the thing that it says we've got to do and we put it into our checklists for that process. Yep. So supplier onboarding, check what their environmental credentials are. Suddenly we can very quickly change behavior in our team if from the top we say we will use checklists just to make sure that we create replicable processes. And just to sort of frame why I believe in this so much, just finished a module that I've been working through with people on the Catalyst program. The team that effectively I left in 2016, the sort of core team that I was working with was about 35. 12 mil turnover. Roll the clock forwards 5 years, 2021. So there's another photo of the team put up online, and I've kept in touch with quite a few of the team. Really high respect for them. I think they're like 20 mil odd plus now, so they've increased the turnover, and yet there's 80% change in the team.
But the process is solid.
But the process is what's allowed them to bring new people in, new people leave, but the process is documented, which means that you can change to the people, but if you've still got the core and the heart.
Core foundation. And actually, so shortly before we joined the interview, James and I were talking about some of, I guess, James's superpowers, if I frame it that way. So James, in his career, has taken an idea and then put the processes around that idea and to execute upon that business and scale the business. So that's what James brings with Amplified. And like he said, he works with leaders to help them, I guess, declutter and simplify and just put these lovely oiled processes together to actually get to their goals faster. And I think that is a particular skill set. So just on that subject, can you talk a bit about your experience working with visionaries and some of the challenges that come with the, I guess, the visionary and the integrator? I think, is it Seth Godin that talks about that? That book, Rocket Fuel, I don't know, it's something that that kind of resonated with me, because I realized I was a crazy ideas visionary guy, and actually that's why I wasn't necessarily so good at doing the stuff that you do. So it's almost like I really respect and admire someone with your expertise, because that's a businesses need that structure and that organization. So can you talk about some of the opportunities and challenges just in your experience working with crazy visionaries and how you can kind of how do you make that work?
Maybe not crazy. That's not the case all the time, but like
I'm speaking about myself.
Well, look, it is that it's to some extent become a little bit of a sort of stereotyped, expected way of being, like to be. Look, an entrepreneur, especially like a visionary entrepreneur, sees something that other people either haven't seen or other people have been unwilling to sort of step into that space and create it. So they already have something in them that is is, you know, unique, and it's not, this doesn't exist, like that switch or that spark doesn't exist with everyone on the planet. So it's a very just that step in itself is to some extent incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, like probably a bit of both. And so when you kind of, you know, get into this, you're like, okay, well, you have to almost not, there has to be a disconnect with almost caring or not, or choosing what voices get in to tell you what you should do. It can often be the case that a visionary is internally referenced rather than externally referenced. So as soon as a entrepreneur or visionary, so the ideas can come from within, like an inner belief that this is right and this is what they need to do. As we know in business, user research, really understanding like what the customer needs and really drilling that is where real key insights come from. So the first step of creating it then becomes to some extent less effective, and they need to get out of the way and let people that have a different mindset, who are more externally referenced and are willing to like listen to the client base and understand, all right, what really is working, what isn't working, and what's happening here. So that's why I work with this profile. Personality profiles get a bad rap, but hey, at least it's the conversation to say that we all we all have like different ways of approaching things is the important discussion point. So I've tended to work with visionary, really inspiring like business partners, and I've tended to be like the person who goes, okay, right, I can sort of see what that vision is, but how do we actually turn that into an executable plan? How do we actually turn that into something that that the team want to go and solve? And look, the biggest trick in this, you know, personally, has been let's put the stake out there, and then to some extent, like, as long as your team has the capability and is trained, get out of the way and like let them work out how to get there. I do that through planning processes, divergent, convergent planning processes, where that whole team, the core team in that, build that plan together. Because if you do that, you're far more likely for that plan to be executed if everyone's like, you know, concerns about whether it is or isn't achievable are heard. So, yeah, so, you know, done that hundreds of times. It's what I do very early on when I work with any leader, because or any team, because it is people, long as it's a safe space, and it's really interesting. I've worked with some leaders who seem like quite you know, they talk quite, I'd say, like a sort of fierce position, like when they speak to me directly, but actually in the team there's respect. There's often respect there. So even if it can feel like they've got a bit of a hot head, I generally see teams being willing to say what they think, because like ultimately it's in the interest of the team to solve, to get that to work, because everyone benefits. So
okay, that's interesting. So could you talk a little bit about what, for those listeners out there that don't know what divergent planning is, can you just kind of walk us through very quickly what that is? And you talked about being in a safe space, and I understand that as that leader needs to be willing to kind of pull out all the not the skeletons in the closet, but basically all the things that are going on behind the scenes, because there's that, obviously part of their job as a founder is to, you know, provide this image of everything's great and this is where we're going, and but underneath the hood, they're obviously they could be in turmoil. But so could you talk us about what that process looks like, and what the objective is?
Yeah, so like in summary, our schooling system, and, you know, to some extent business, rewards us for having the answers and getting to the answers quickly.
Okay.
And we get used to that. And look, especially like personally as an engineer, used to just like problem solve. I think it's Einstein, you know, he said, like, if I had 20 hours to solve a problem, I'd spend 19 on the question. So in a divergent convergent planning process, what I'm trying to do is to get people to sit uncomfortably with the question for longer. So it starts to expand like the options before, gunning to an answer. If you look at design thinking and like the double diamond, you kind of go through that twice. You go through a double divergent convergent planning process. So I've overlaid a few different models in the way that I do it, but ultimately what it's doing is to go right, sit with what could the world look like? Where would you like to be? What have you even stopped to think why did I start this business, and is it still like serving that original kind of like vision? Because most of the time it isn't. It's suddenly the business wants more and more time. The team are getting pissed off with like the shifting in strategy. Home life is getting harder because you're not spending enough time at home because the business demands so much time of you. So you get caught in this. It's almost like a control need. You get caught because you're trying to control everything. You get caught as a sort of founder in trying to serve everyone, and in doing so, you serve no one. And so, especially not yourself. I say, look, first off, trying to get people to think about themselves, the oxygen mask on themselves. I do life will early on and just say, have you got balance in your life in the program? Yeah. And so divergent convergent planning means that you work out where you want to be. You look at the reality, what are the capabilities? Can we do that? Then ideation around, well, what is, if there were no constraints, what would be possible, and how would we solve all of the sort of challenges around the reality and capabilities, and then create an actual action plan. And so many times I've seen the sort of process run where the action plan isn't like implemented, and then holding to account is even more important. Think of how many meetings you've been to where you've walked out the room, not really understood what your actions were. You turn up to the next meeting, no one talks about the actions from the last meeting. It's always about the new. So that accountability piece is absolutely key. And just going back to schooling and to some extent work rewarding us for having the answers. As a leader, what happens if you are the one that has all the answers is you create a team who rely on you to have the answers, and that will never scale beyond you. So it's why when I do weekly calls with the founders and CEOs I work with, we go through a process where you have to ask questions before you give answers. I think it's sort of based on a sort of experiential learning model.
Can you say that again? So you have to ask the right question before
not the right question. You have to ask questions that get the person, we call it being in the hot seat, that get the person in the hot seat to really define whether what they thought was the problem is a problem, and also start to explore whether they've thought about things from different viewpoints or different angles. So what this the skill that I'm trying to help like leaders create there is, rather than getting really good at like answering problems in your business, get really good at answering good questions, because you start to develop a team around you who will not need you, because you break the dependency on you having all the answers.
Which then frees you up to focus on the more high value things, I guess. Exactly. And there's yourself.
There's also like a human need to be needed and for significance, and it's a difficult thing to hear, but our behavior as leaders, and especially I see it quite a lot in visionary leaders, is that they're really good at flying in with their cape on and solving the problem. But that behavior, just the behavior of flying in and solving it, the team start to get used to you doing that. By doing that, the team will not solve problems because they know you're going to fly in with a cape. So the day that you don't fly in, and obviously you need to pick your time when you do it, but this is why, to some extent, in sport, you've got 90 minutes, 80 minutes on the pitch. You're not always on the pitch. You need times when you're in the training ground where the team suddenly realize you're not going to fly in, where it matters less, and to start to get them to build, their ability to problem solve. So
that's interesting.
And this isn't always, we're talking about quite big cognitive shifts. So, speaking to, I think someone who's involved with Cedars, they recognize sometimes the most likely chance for a business to be successful is when the original founder is willing to take a slightly different role, unless they are able to go on that sort of that journey. But the companies I'm working with at the moment, we work in bands, so 1 to 10, 10 to 50, and then over 50, there's different models you need again. So in the sort of 1 to 10 stage, you can help them, and this is where the integrator comes in. You can help people that are visionaries try and find someone that does enjoy creating the systems and the processes and turning it into executable plans. So you allow the visionary to be more of that outward person. If they're fundraising, they can go and do more of the thing that they're really good at. And that's what happened in the environmental consultancy. I stepped into the MD role. My business partner was able to be sort of free to be more out there, doing M&A, deals and so on. And the team were then able to get into, it's about getting the right people on the bus and then the right people in the right seats on the bus.
Yep.
That all happened, and we went from 2.8 to 8.9 mil turnover in 1 year. So there's so much potential locked up in business and it's never realized if you don't get this bit right.
I think this would be a good segue to introduce our sponsor, Flexi.
I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to our amazing sponsor, Flexi. These days, we have multiple subscriptions, from streaming services to gift boxes and much more. Discover Flexi's unique subscription marketplace, sourced from independent British brands, from organic beauty products, cocktail kits, and responsibly sourced coffee to plant-based meals, gift boxes, and much more. Whatever your passion, look forward to a regular box of joy delivered straight to your door. All easy to pause, cancel, or resume in a tap or two from one single dashboard. So give Flexi a try. It's free to download from the App Store, or head over to www.flexiapp.uk. That's FLEXYAPP.uk. Now, back to our guest.
That's really interesting. So it's funny because I had, he's not an official advisor. So I kind of look at him as a mentor / advisor / friend. I'm always hopping on about have the right people on the seats of the bus and all of that. But then just talking to him, I realized that actually I might have been putting myself in the wrong seat. I mean, okay, I'm a founding CEO. I got the business to a certain point, but actually, I'm really good at sales. So in hindsight, would I have been better off putting myself in a sales director role? It's almost like not demoting myself, but actually just focus on that, and then have somebody. And I almost kind of realized that a bit. I may have waited a bit long for that, as an example. So absolutely right for me to start things and be that founder CEO, but maybe just kind of migrate from that position. I don't know. I mean, there might be two sides to that, but it's kind of recognizing, what your superpowers are, I guess. And but as a leader, it's kind of interesting. So it kind of resonate with me. Yeah.
I mean, it's that capability piece. I think sort of skills assessments are really important. It's this is
recognizing.
It's the whole thing about working in and on the business, right? So it's very easy to say I want this output, but what it takes to get there, it isn't just having the product and the sales team. There's so much in, who do we need to get external consultants in? Is this something new? How do we train up our team? Are we going to hire, from within. All these types of things are who owns this. I generally believe like you need ownership around delivery. If it's too vague, so in society we tend to build around in individuals. We understand that as like a prime minister or a head of state or whatever it is. We sort of tend to build around people, and I think you need champions of projects and ideas to really sort of see it through. I like the kind of, to some extent, the matrix. It can get complex as a model, and you don't need to worry about it when you're too small. But I don't know if you've seen that diagram where, like, if you've got two people, there's two lines, if there's three, and you keep going, and suddenly if you get beyond, and this is the pizza rule, right? If you get beyond 7 or 8 people, there's so many lines of communication, you have to change the style of communication. So it can't be one-to-one to one-to-one, it has to be one-to-many. You need intranets, you need platforms. So this is why if you can't get that sort of system in place, or things are moving too quickly to be able to like share that information, it's why it's the pizza rule was very well known out of Silicon Valley. They don't get a bigger team than the size of a pizza, so they can all share a pizza when they're working late into the night trying to make something happen.
That's interesting. So that's similar to the lid. So John Maxwell talked about it in his book, The 21 Laws of Irrefutable Leadership. He talked about everyone has a lid, and you need to delegate. Otherwise you're going to cap your growth. So it's almost like, unless you and I guess having the right process in place, and this, but it's also that culture, that mindset. So I give another bit of context. So I'm a parent. I've got 3 teenage daughters, and my wife and I, Mandy and I, are really big on teaching our kids how to think, not what to think. I grew up in quite a religious household, and I was basically told what to think pretty much my entire childhood. And I've got amazing parents, and they're lovely, and had a lot of amazing emotional support. But it's I guess every generation of parenting, you probably parent the opposite to what your parents did, or you try and give your kids what you didn't get. Even if you had it pretty good, like I did, you're still, maybe that's how we evolve. But I think to your point earlier about, rather than the leader flying in with his cape on to solve the problems, if you kind of allow your team to think for themselves, it's the same kind of thing. And then that way you're then capable of much more. And then that size of that pizza, I don't know, or the lid will be, I don't know, you can do more. Yeah.
Look, I really aligned to that, James. And I believe that sort of money off the table for why people go to work. I think like growth and contribution are the 2 key pieces. So if either of those drop, you can start to feel like something isn't right. So if you're not growing as an individual, or if you don't feel like you can contribute, or the business isn't getting the best out of you, then that is that can also be demotivating in itself. So I like the concept of the sort of always Paretos everywhere, 80-20. If you can try and find around 20% of your time to work on sort of personal development, you increase like what the 80% is able to do as an individual. So giving your team that opportunity to learn. I think the planning sessions, when you get a team into a room away from the day-to-day, that in itself like can, a change is as good as the rest. That can really like tap into sort of intrinsic motivation. People start to feel like they're really part of something. They feel like they're really building this business, and that their thoughts matter and they're being included. And going back to the time in London when I was running the design and tech school, which was after like environmental consultancy, I used to do quite a lot of the personal and professional development training. So, and in that, we would say to the students, look, you get hired for your hard skills, but, potentially fired for your soft skills. So you've got to work. Your soft skills really matter. And to the extent now, when I'm doing a personal review, I do it on 2 axes. I do it on performance and versus behavior. So I look at what is the performance individually, and then what's their contribution to, behaviors around their contribution to the team performance. Because you can have really great lone wolves, but if they bring the team down, then their total that they add to the business could be a negative if they are bringing down like 5 people around them. So you really got to think about that, like as a leader, there's so many moving parts in a business, and it gets really complex, and it also allows for really because it's really interesting, because you get them to mark where they are on this graph, you mark where they are on this graph, and the discussion around what the difference is the most interesting bit. Why are they seeing X and you're seeing Y? What's happening? So it's how we think is underpins all of this,
and then also knowing where where you sit in that spectrum, as far as you talk about the disc assessments and the skill, where is your skill set in the team, and then to have those honest conversations with yourself.
So it's super interesting. Like, when I work with people, they kind of say, I wish I knew this sooner, especially if they started to build their team. But when I speak to someone new, it's often quite difficult to, I think as a leader, you have to be open to the fact that you might need to change, or something may not be right in the style that I'm using, that it's so, and that's really difficult, that step. And I remember like buying a ticket to do a bungee jump. Like I wasn't worried at the bungee jump stage. My worry was buying the ticket, and it's buying the ticket that is the thing. And that's where because it's a commitment, right? It's a point that you go, okay, I'm up for this. I'm going to go on my own hero's journey. And it's bloody scary, because you're going into the unknown. So, do you want to go into the unknown by yourself, or do you want to like go into it with someone that's already been there? There's a real resistance, because it's, to some extent, you have to be vulnerable. And again, as a CEO founder, we're taught it's all about having all the answers, and turning up, being everyone's rock. Well, it's just not realistic. But I tell you, I believe in a world where founders can scale their businesses without burnout. That's why I started Amplified. I personally have in sort of the 5 businesses I've scaled, a couple of not-for-profits. In the for-profits one, I've been up to the edge of either like physical or mental burnout, because it doesn't matter how much you give, it will always want more. So that has to change. If it's in your nature to do that, or that's the way that it feels things are going, that isn't right. That the business needs you to be doing all the things that make you able to perform at your best. So whatever that is, like fitness, meditation, like time with the family. There's so many leaders that haven't had a holiday for like 2-3 years. A holiday is a brilliant opportunity to get the team. It's a safer way to get the team to demonstrate that they can problem solve without you there. That's a perfect example of not flying in with a cape on. But if you don't go on holiday, you never give them the chance to step up and demonstrate what they can do.
That resonates with me. So I'm in that. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Sorry, my dog's barking. If anyone here, little Bean, little Romanian rescue dog. Sadly, I know that COVID, a lot of folks are in this boat, or the pandemic has meant that people haven't been able to go away to their usual, so they've just worked instead. 3 years without a break for me. Went away a few weeks ago, maybe 5 weeks ago, and it was actually amazing, and it's actually helped me reframe everything. And I think, it's entrepreneurship. Everything has its cost. And actually, no balance, no time with family. I'm literally guilty as charged. And when
we say go away,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
When we say go away, I appreciate that it can be a staycation. It could, you literally could, go down the end of the garden. It just means that you're out of the business. And, personally, I normally like pick an audiobook I'm going to listen to and get loads of new ideas as a result of being away and not at the core of the business.
I met another founder, very successful entrepreneur, who exited his business last year for a good amount of money, and even though he actually said that it was a bit of an anticlimax when he sold the business, so he had all this money, his bank account went up 1,000 times, but he was a bit kind of anticlimax. His mentality was little and often, and I like that. Like you said, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go abroad. It can be it could be just a break. You give yourself permission to step away, and to focus on the people that are really important.
Just to what you've just touched on there is, I think, really important as well. Like that, exiting a completely different discussion. It isn't, for the companies I'm working with, we're talking about the concept of an exit, but sometimes that can be just a bit more golf or not being at the core of the business. And some people do want to, obviously sell. One has gone on that journey, in the year that I've worked with them. So it has on that exit path now. And for the others, collectively they've doubled their turnover. So like this works, and it isn't just about hitting the marketing button. It's part of it, but it's about getting the right projects and getting the things that will help them get closer to where they want to get to. Doing those, the dominoes, line up your dominoes, and if each domino gets bigger, you can knock over the Eiffel Tower and Everest. If they're not in the right order, then everything stops, and that is really disruptive for the team. But exiting, you've got to have a really good idea, because CEOs are their business. The founders see themselves as their business, and so it's a real. I met a guy on two things I'm learned the most from Necker Island. One was one of the guys who'd exited for really, really big sums. He was the most unhappy he'd been, because he'd lost his identity, lost his team, lost everything, and as a result of exiting and leaving that, and I think built the company to sort of 800 people or something, and then the next day hadn't literally didn't know what to do. So have a plan. I think around sort of giving back, philanthropy is really important. Personally, I would. I ended up doing that. I chaired a charity for 5 years, basically, on exit, that just kept me. It was a sort of stabilizing effect as I was changing and moving around different roles and trying to work out what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be in life, or how I felt I could best give back. And there's I don't know if you sort of got into a discussion with the guy you're on about, but sort of founders or entrepreneurs' guilt around exiting, having that money, it's a really difficult thing. So it's another discussion, but that is it's very real. And the concept, we're sort of fed this story of start a business, grow a business, sell a business, but if you're which is great, but it isn't as sort of sexy as it sounds. As we all know, the middle bit's bloody mayhem, and then you leave and suddenly you miss it. So
that North Star that you talked about, it's almost
has to be beyond selling it.
Yeah, that's beyond selling it. So I like that idea of the North Star in the distance, and you might have these different things that you want to achieve, these desired outcomes or these goals. But it doesn't just stop there. Otherwise, what's your purpose? What is your why? Do you have what's your why with Amplified, or I'm sure your North Star goes beyond where you are now, but what?
Great question. Look, my why, it's almost the same as my original why of creating the Student Windsurf Association, was to give other people the same opportunity that we had, and the fun we had at university, like through windsurfing. There was no network. It was just, there was a few clubs. We came together whilst we were at university, started running a series of events where people would, different universities would go to other events. We went from about 8 clubs to about 53 clubs with windsurfing clubs once we formed the Student Windsurfer Association. And those presidents of the different clubs could go on and learn, cut their teeth in running a business. They could come in. We had a model where they got elected into the committee and then ran the Student Windsurfer Association. Amplifies like that for me. Like I've fallen into many of the pitfalls. Some of the businesses I've set up are still here. Some aren't. Just had loads of experience of, and that piece about not looking after you is fundamental for me. So a world where founders can scale without burnout is so important personally, because it is possible. And it's why I start with a life wheel when I work with founders on the Catalyst program, because the second thing from NECA, amazing opportunity to go out there. We were doing business brainstorming around Virgin Unite with Branson in the morning, and
wow, it's amazing,
in the afternoon. So it's an amazing experience.
I didn't know you did that. It's amazing.
Yeah, but the second thing, so the first bit was about having a plan after you retire. The second bit, it's weird that they're all to do with life rather than business. The second bit was about how you resonate, how you and your partner. So this is all about life. Do you, on the life wheel, it's about how much attention do you spend to in your love life and your family and friends and so on. This kind of gets into love languages piece, because your love language might be different to someone else's love language. I actually believe there's definitely something the same that happens within business. That's potentially another program. So we all have different love languages. So working out. So for my wife Sophie, she I know mine is service, but that doesn't connect with her because hers is time. So the way we've dealt with that is we'll watch something after we've eaten tea together, but then I'll sometimes drag the laptop out and work, but that's still meeting her need of time together. So just an example where you can quite quickly help things in your you can quite quickly meet the needs of other people if you consider it from what they need rather than what you would naturally do. So the whole going on the journey, entrepreneurs are going on this crazy kind of exponential journey, and with their partners. So there were 2 examples on NECA. There was one where the husband and wife were both in all of these sessions and did it together, even though they had kids. They had, there's they sort of had someone looking after them or whatever. The other couple, the guy was in there and the wife was looking after her children. So and that is so important. It shouldn't be a zero-sum game because one of the partners is doing really well that the other doesn't have to. In life and in relationships, and this can happen in business as well. And there's so many parallels. How do you also help your partner go on their own trajectory? And that was one of the biggest takeaways. It was it's so important to consider that and have just having the discussion with your partners, and first step, isn't it? Recognizing that even might be a thing. So we always try and have a date night at least once a month around the time that we the day that we were married. So each month.
That's really nice. That's really, really nice. Well, I think you do have there is a kind of you build up that the trust piece, but so you can go if you don't have the balance, you can go quite a long time by almost in a deficit where if you're not investing in those relationships, but then it does reach a point where you're kind of really overdrawn and things go wrong. And I've experienced that firsthand. It's the cost, but like you said, there is a way to actually do both. And actually, if you've got a more balance in your life, then you're going to be your best self and actually be more effective But it's just recognizing that, and sometimes you have to go through it to actually realize that actually it's dangerous. It's dangerous ground. But then when you come out the other side, you realize that actually you can, you can do both. You can have that balance. Well, really interesting discussion. I think we're coming up to the end of our time. Couple of questions. So, any books that you've read in the last 5 years that perhaps had a big impact on you that you could recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, great question. I often ask this at the end of interviews just to get ideas for next books. So
that's what I'm doing.
So, if you come across The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters?
No, I haven't read that.
So that
The Chimp Paradox.
Yeah, that's going back to how we think, not necessarily what we think. That's really, really powerful. It's a really powerful book. It talks about, the chimp, the human, and the computer that all sit inside our head. My wife's a psychologist, so she tells me that it's based on Eden, whatever, I can't remember, but it's basically taking like something that's quite complex in psychology and turning it into layman's terms. So it's the translation of, well, you've got these three going on. How do you use them? You've also got gremlins in there. Mm-hmm. So how do you try and you can't cage the shrimp because it just gets louder and louder. You have to exercise your shrimp. So that can literally be, in the book, it's about throwing the banana and them running off and getting the banana. So you need to work out what that banana is for you. A lot of people, that's doing exercise. Some people it's reading downtime. Some people it's going out and having a big blowout. Obviously that can tend towards being less effective the next day. But anyway, whatever it is, it's like knowing that you've got a chimp in there and don't ignore it. The human obviously is the thinking element. But I think it's I forget he puts timings on how in your brain you've got filters. Where does it go? What jumps in first? And I'm pretty sure that you can use like the computer to hack. That get to the 80% much quicker by having small processes in your head that get you to like get to the thought or get to your thinking before the chimp or the gremlins. So an example would be so when you're looking at, let's say you're looking at a business relationship, you're looking at starting a new partnership or relationship, and this is something that I think Tim Ferriss is like amazing at doing this type of thing of like summarizing it. So he has rules, stake, stop, and I love that. I use it a lot. So what are the rules of engagement? What are the stakes? Like how much are you risking in this? And if you wanted to stop it, how could you stop it? So that is like a hack. It's just like you have it in the computer, have it in the background, and you can just very quickly go, all right, so you can look at something before just jumping in with a yes or no answer. You're able to like go, right, well, let's define what this actually looks like. What are you looking for? Am I able to actually provide that? And if this all goes wrong, how would we get out? So an example, but so Dr. Steve Peters, I think he was very heavily involved with the Olympic team in 2012. So he's in the background working, again, sports psychology and business psychology. There's so many overlaps. It's almost full circle in our discussion here.
I just tried to find it on Amazon, but I couldn't find it. But I'll but Dr. C. Peters,
the Chimp Paradox.
Yeah, I will definitely get a copy of that. Okay, so if you could have a coffee with anyone, who would that be? You never know. Rocket Pod might be able to join the dots at some point in the next decade.
James, that's
good one.
That's a really good question. I mean, the problem is the obvious ones, around sort of like Elon. I still, he really like him or not, he's an amazing thinker. He just changes. Like, if you, I'm not too like fanboy about it, but like, do look at it a bit. And like, when you when you see some of the discussions, like he has hot tubs with his brother and they just like, chew the fat, and then they end up deciding that this is, probably a simulation, and it's just really interesting stuff, because things tend towards points, you know what I mean? Like in the world, it's interesting, Amplified for me is about tending towards helping people, because, actually really one of the most important things to learn in the world is you kind of have to give to get type thing. So if you tend towards that as a trying to help people in the world, will in turn help you. I have share, smile, learn on my doormat, like when I come into my office here. Like it's a thing that's like sharing knowledge and understanding is like so important, and smiling through it, we've got to have fun, and then we'll learn as a result. Look, I mean, I think Elon, it's really interesting. Like a child's brain has way more neural connections than an adult brain, and it's about what you remove, not what you add. So learning is the subtraction, not the addition, and ultimately moving from sort of knowledge to understanding. So I think, it's unfortunately it's a very expected response, but I think with Elon, I really, to be frank, I don't expect it to be a very enjoyable coffee, because I'm pretty sure he wouldn't. I don't think he'd want to be there. But with Branson, it was like just nice. It was just it wasn't like a weird. But Branson comes across to me as someone, sure he'll have his faults, but he sort of comes across as someone who is, he writes everything down. He's interested like in you. I don't know if it would be like that with Elon, but but
know. So
that would be my response. Then I don't know what I'd ask him to try and understand like how he thinks, but he's someone who's trying to people talk about like making a dent in the universe. I kind of think like human beings need to take the dent out of the universe, but anyway, we've made a big enough dent as it is. But he's someone who's like interplanetary habitation. That's big thinking, right? He set his goals.
Yeah, really amazing. Cool. Well, no, that's awesome. Just finally, if you were to give some advice to our listeners, there's going to be a mix of entrepreneurs. There's going to be, we have quite a young listener audience as well. What advice would that be? Or they could be a budding entrepreneur or a budding leader.
Make time to reflect. So make time to try to understand what's happening. Like just don't just keep hammering away and going and going and going. Just like take a moment to stop, breathe, and ask yourself what's really happening here. And even to the extent in a meeting that's really important. Like, we used to teach we created a graduate recruitment program to bring our graduates through in the environmental consultancy. Took about 15 through that program. They were like some of the best people in the company, and we get them to very early on. We say hold at least 10% of your brain capacity back in a meeting to work out what's happening, who's talking, who isn't, who you need to engage. Who's the most important person that in that room that you need to get on side. It's save a bit back to think beyond, and again it goes back to the windsurfing coaching really. Where's your mind, where have you where is now in your mind?
That's really good advice. Excellent. And where can people find you? So well,
look, online, LinkedIn, do a lot on there. James Potten, amplified.me is the Amplified website, and I have jamespotten.com as well. But Amplified is the main way to get in touch, and got ways to book in with me or one of the team, and email address and phone number. So
okay, and you've got the bandwidth to take on other entrepreneurs that are looking to simplify and scale their businesses.
No, absolutely. It's why I built a program, because it's scalable. It's something where I've taken all of my learning, turn it into an 8-module program that people can do over 8 weeks if they wanted. But some tend to do it over a bit longer. But it's there to basically have a download, a bit like the Matrix of like, these are all the things that it's a mini MBA. It's like, these are the things that I found that really helped me scale my business. So it's kind of written when in the around the 2.8 to 8.9 period. What did we do and how did we handle it?
Okay,
In
excellent.
terms of our growth.
Fantastic. Okay, well, you have to check James Potten and Amplify it out. Well, great. Well, thanks for joining us, James. It's been really delightful speaking with you today. It's been nice, laid back, informal, honest discussion. So, thank you very much for your time and graciousness today.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, James.
Right. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Rocket Pod. If you get a moment and you enjoyed this interview, we'd love it if you could jump over to Apple Podcasts, leave a quick review. We love all your messages. It really helps us get exposure to share more inspiring stories and figure out what you, our listeners, really enjoy. A couple of takeaways from James's interview. I loved James's approach to taking a break, taking a step back and reflect on what you really want and spending more time on the question versus the problem you're solving. And also really understand that North Star. So, when you do achieve your goals, you've still got a greater purpose. But I think the key message here was to bring more balance back in our lives, spend more time with the people that really matter, and declutter our work lives as well. And maybe, if you are a leader working with a team, allow your team some space to actually solve problems on their own and not fly in with the cape to solve the problems for them. So, really great to have James on with us today. Have an amazing week ahead. We'll see you next time. Take care.